Our country has crossed a major threshold with more than half the population receiving one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, when you look at just those who are eligible, it's more than 60% of those aged 12 and over. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, we are still a long way off from having the entire country vaccinated, but what do the recent stats mean for our day-to-day living?
Well, what it means is that we're getting closer to maybe having a two-dose summer instead of Justin Trudeau's promised one-dose summer. And what does that mean in real terms? Well, it means that if you watch Phil Nicholson win the PGA Championship on the weekend, he's surrounded by people. If you watch, and you and I have chatted about this, Blue Jays baseball down in Tampa. I mean, Tampa Bay was playing the Blue Jays all weekend. I think they took the city bus to the game. The stadiums are that close. And they had people in the stands enjoying themselves. The Jays are off to play the Yankees for the next few days. The NHL playoffs happening in the U.S. They're having thousands of people in the stands. That is because they have vaccine doses, and between the number of people vaccinated, the number of people infected, they are able to say we've got at least a certain level of herd immunity and we can get back to day-to-day life. We have neither the high number of infections the U.S. has had, nor the high number of vaccine doses. So, comparatively speaking, we kept our case counts lower. That's great. But we don't have the vaccine doses. That's bad. So, we're stuck with people still being vulnerable. We need to get the vaccine dosages up and get towards that herd immunity number so that we can get back to the things that we all miss about summer. The weather's getting warmer, Hal. We want to go out and be around our fellow human beings.
And hug our family members. That's so important right now. Show them how much we really love them. The extended family as well here. Now, Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who's been blasted for his vaccine rollout, says now that Ottawa will be ramping up second doses in June. Now, is that earlier than expected?
No, not really. And the reason that we're getting to second doses in June is that most provinces delayed second doses to try and get some level of protection for the population. Why? Because we didn't have enough doses. We didn't have what the U.S. has, which is they've got more doses than they can hand out at any given time. They've always got tens of millions of doses on hand, ready to go, and they don't have the people taking it up at this point. They're starting to plateau. We've in fact passed them on the number of people getting first doses. We are sitting here with less than 5% of our total population being fully vaccinated. The Americans are getting close to half of the eligible population being fully vaccinated. That's why they're getting back to normal. Even if you look at the 4-month delay between doses, well, there's an awful lot of people coming up for their second doses now. This is not something that they should be bragging about. They're still going with the same end date, which is by the end of September, every person that wants a vaccine will be able to get one by the end of September. That's a lot slower than our counterparts are going through their vaccine program.
Brian, an arm of the federal government here in Canada says we have received a cumulative 40 million doses by the end of June, but yet another arm is saying that's actually closer to 50 million. Who's right?
Well, you've got the political side and you've got the public health side. And so this became a story last week when Major General Brody, who took over from Brigadier General Brody, who took over from Major General Danny Fortin in leading the vaccine rollout program. In her first appearance, she said, we expect to get 40 million doses by the end of June. And a bunch of us sat up and went, well, wait a minute. You guys were saying 48 to 50 million by the end of June. It's in Hansard. You can find the video of Anita Anand standing up in the House of Commons saying this multiple times. And so there were no clear answers for a couple of days. And then it came out, what the Public Health Agency and General Brody is talking about are the confirmed deliveries. And what we're talking about is what we expect. Well, given how the vaccine rollout program is going, I'm not sure that we can go with what the government expects. Last week there was a big hype that Canada got a record 4.5 million doses. That's because they moved up the doses for this week. Doses are normally showing up on a Monday. Well, holiday Monday this week, Victoria Day. What'd they do? They shoved almost all the deliveries into last week and said, That's your allotment for the next 2 weeks. What happens if Moderna doesn't deliver? We will be down 8 to 10 million doses in a 1 month period. So that would delay that getting back to normal that we were just talking about, that so many people want to be able to go to the baseball game, to the rodeo, to the concert, to see their grandma, to do any of the things that we normally take for granted.
Brian, many Canadians were crossing the border not far from where we are here at Bridge City News at the Carway border crossing in Montana and getting their COVID-19 vaccine shots. The Blackfeet tribe in Montana had some extras and they were sharing with everyone, and not just those with the Blackfoot Confederacy here in Alberta. The mobile clinics have since been shut down. Why did the Trudeau government allow over 1,000 Canadians to cross the border? Then it appears that they had a change of heart.
So there was a lot going on. You had what happened at the Alberta-Montana crossing with the Blackfeet and local U.S. senator on the Montana side getting involved to say, yeah, he told the U.S. Border Services, let everyone through. And my understanding is you were only about 100 meters into U.S. territory. You got your vaccine. You waited 15 minutes. You drove back. What's wrong with that? That's a good thing. And we had, as one example, the mayor of Windsor, Ontario, just across the bridge from Detroit. It's even closer than where most of the people lining up at to go get the vaccine from the Blackfeet. It's closer. You've got a major city next to a major city, and they've got a huge surplus of supply. To give you an example, Ford Field in Detroit, they've got a mass vax clinic that can handle up to 7,000 people a day. They were hitting about 2,500 people a day. They said, bring your people over, we'll vaccinate them. Drew Dilkens, the mayor, asked and asked, local health officials asked, and they kept being told no. And that was around the time that Public Health Agency of Canada and Canada Border Services shut down all of these, except for the ones with, specific agreements like Manitoba going across for their truckers, and I think some teachers have been allowed to cross. Drew Dilkens, the mayor of Windsor, is incredibly upset. He offered to run city buses. City of Windsor buses are actually licensed to cross the border. In normal times, they do. There's a city bus you can get on in Windsor. It'll take you across the border, do a loop at Detroit, come back. He said, we'll take that bus to Ford Field in Detroit. We'll pay for a Canada Border Services agent to sit on the bus and make sure nobody runs off to Target. They still said no. And at every turn, they've said no and said anyone that crosses has to quarantine for 2 weeks. Well, that takes away the impetus. There's 75,000, and I hate to just use the Windsor-Detroit example, but I spent a lot of time on the phone with Mayor Dilkens. 75,000 surplus doses in Michigan that were offered to them. They asked for emergency authority to bring them over. It's a short drive. It's a few hundred meters across the bridge. They said no. The owner of the Ambassador Bridge, it's a privately owned bridge, said, you bring people over and you can do it in the parking lot of my duty free, which is closed right now because nobody can stop. And they haven't entered the U.S. and they can go back. Public Health Agency and Canada Border Services still said, no, they'll have to quarantine for 2 weeks. They're shutting down every opportunity at communities like this across the country. And the best that anyone can come up with is it would make the Trudeau government look bad if they had to start taking doses from the United States and getting Canadians vaccinated down there. It would expose the hole in his plans. He doesn't want that.
Brian, this week we learned of a man who was arrested for what police allegedly said he was threatening to kill all of the premiers in Canada. Now, the same man has spoken out against vaccines, lockdowns, and other public health measures. What else do we know about this anti-lockdown activist, Chris Sky?
Chris Sky, his real name is Chris Sakosha. He's from the Toronto area. His family is involved in building houses, major developers. He apparently has had a falling out with his family over his activism, and he's been speaking out against lockdown measures, against public health measures. And in some ways, you look at what he's saying, and he's saying everyone's essential. We should open up our businesses. And these are things that I agree with, that a lot of people agree with. But then you look at what else he's saying. And he's saying that making claims like vaccines are poison, no one should be taking them. He makes claims that this is all to bring about a vaccine passport so that we can have all of our rights taken away forever. That's claiming that that's the reason for a global pandemic is going a bit far. But the allegation is that Chris Sky or Chris Sakosha made a call on or around May 12th, 2021 to a guy he'd been doing business with named Rob Carbone, guy who heads up a fledgling new party called the Republican Party of Canada. Carbone told police that he threatened to kill Doug Ford, to shoot him in the head, and to kill Carbone as well, and every premier in Canada. Now, I spoke to Chris Guy the other day. He was driving from Vancouver to Kelowna. He's going to be stopping in Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and elsewhere with his book tour. And he said, yeah, I was charged, but all of this is hearsay. None of it's true. I'll win in court. He admitted to me that he has a large firearms collection, that was all seized by police, but he said he thinks he'll get them all back. None of this has been tested in court, but it really doesn't help the people who want to end lockdowns, that want to remove measures for these sorts of things to be going on, and then for the guy who's facing the charges just to say, well, it's just a big conspiracy against me. Wow. That doesn't help anybody.
Brian, last year, the idea that the COVID-19 virus came from a lab was laughed at as a conspiracy theory, but now that talk is back. Let me ask you, what changed?
If I wanted to be flip, I would just say Donald Trump's no longer president. But it's probably a bit more than that. This idea that the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is behind COVID-19, that it leaked out of a lab was something that was being talked about in mainstream media, by scientists, by all kinds of people in early 2020. So from January until around March, early April. And then Donald Trump started talking about it and saying, I read this story, I heard about this. And suddenly, all these people turned around and said, that's a conspiracy theory, that's crazy. Now, this isn't to say, as some have claimed, that China released COVID-19 as a bioweapon. This is to say that the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that it may have been an accidental leak. Now, as I've written in the Toronto Sun several times, Dr. Theresa Tam, our current Chief Medical Officer of Health for the entire country, spoke to a Commons committee back in 2009 about how SARS had leaked out of a lab in Beijing and then spread around the world. These are not unusual incidents. There are cables from 2018, January 2018, when American officials went to visit the Wuhan Institute of Virology and said, they're doing some important work here, and everyone agrees that you should be working with China for looking at these sorts of diseases because everyone thinks they're going to originate there for various reasons. So we should be working with them to try and find cures. But in 2018, they were saying that it's just not secure enough. They have too many problems. We've got to actually give them money to make them better or something bad is going to happen. Well, now a lot of scientists who were denouncing this a year ago are turning around and saying, maybe this isn't such a far-fetched idea. When I was writing about it last year, I was called a nut job and a conspiracy theorist. Turns out, yeah, there is some truth to this. It's at least worth investigating, Hal, to find out where the truth lies for the origin of this virus.
We only have a couple of moments left here, Brian, but I want to talk to you about Bill C-10. The fight over C-10 continues. You recently wrote that we should not feel too comfortable with the CRTC deciding how to deal with free speech online because they're cozy and too cozy with dictators. How so?
Well, the CRTC is the organization that decides who gets a broadcast license for TV or for radio. So they get to decide if you get a license. And, if you say something that annoys them tonight, they may not turn around and say tomorrow, well, Hal, you and your whole station's off the air. But it might come up at a license renewal. Well, they're very tough at times on Canadian broadcasters. And yet there are at least 2 Chinese-based broadcasters who have aired forced confessions of Chinese nationals and foreign nationals, including Canadians. They've broadcast them, and those forced confessions have been broadcast in Canada because they are carried by Canadian carriers. There's RT, which used to be called Russia Today. It's Vladimir Putin's propaganda channel. These things are allowed to be broadcast. They are given free rein. They're not, hemmed in the way that Canadian broadcasters are. And now we're going to be told, don't worry, hand over your free speech to the CRTC, and they'll look after it. They'll decide what's good and what's not. I'm not sure that we want to do that with an organization that's so cozy with dictatorial regimes like China and Russia.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.